Welcome to Connecting the Dots, the channel where we follow the breadcrumbs to predict where disruptions will take us. Toyota should be celebrating. With over 11.3 million units sold and record profits, they are by far the largest automaker on the planet. From the outside, they look almost untouchable. But behind closed doors, they are not acting invincible. In fact, they are terrified. In a recent event usually used to spread optimism, Toyota CEO Koji Sato issued a brutal warning to his suppliers. The auto industry is in a battle for its very survival against China. Unless Toyota radically transforms how it fights, the company will die. Yet just 2 months later, as if defying their own warning, Toyota abruptly canceled their highly anticipated next-generation EV, the Lexus LFZC. So why would a company facing extinction suddenly cancel the very weapon designed to save them? Over at Ford, Jim Farley is ringing the exact same warning bell. And just like Toyota, Ford's recent actions look completely contradictory. They just dissolved their main EV division, while deliberately walling off their skunkworks team in California. To survive what's coming, two of the most interesting legacy automakers are making the exact same bet. They are leaping straight into the unknown, abandoning a century of history to clone Tesla's next-generation playbook. But they are not doing it for the same reason. Today we dissect the secret skunkworks and the technology to answer one massive question: which legacy automaker is using this blueprint to transform and save their empire, and which is quietly looting the sinking ship while preparing to escape in an ark? If you like my videos, please smash that like button and subscribe. It really helps if this happens early in the video. And patrons keep this channel going, so please consider supporting me on Patreon or as a channel member here on YouTube. Every little bit helps. Now buckle up and get ready, because the auto industry is in for a huge disruption, and disruptions are never boring. Chapter 1. The Temporary Shield. Let's start with a reality check. If you look at the balance sheets today, internal combustion vehicles and hybrids are printing money. Ford's Commercial Pro division is carrying the company, and Toyota's hybrids are the exact reason they just posted a record-breaking year. Because of this, a dangerous narrative has taken hold in the media and the boardroom. The EV transition was overhyped. The storm has passed. Legacy auto can just keep doing what they've always done. But this is missing the real threat. The danger to Ford and Toyota isn't just that electric vehicles exist. The danger is that the Chinese auto industry has figured out how to build everything, ICE and hybrids, not just EVs, faster, better, and unimaginably cheaper than the West. Look at what is happening globally. In Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Australia, and increasingly in Europe, Chinese automakers aren't just taking market share. They are mopping the floor with legacy brands. They are deploying plug-in hybrids with insane range. They are building gas cars loaded with integrated software. That makes a brand new legacy vehicle feel like a flip phone. It is easy to look at the 100% US tariff on Chinese EVs and assume Detroit is safe, but that assumption ignores automotive history. The real issue is that Chinese manufacturing is becoming so cheap that eventually even a 100% tariff won't be enough to stop them. To see exactly how fragile this protection is, look at Canada. In early 2026, when their tariff on Chinese EVs dropped to just 6.1%, Tesla immediately bypassed California and imported the Model 3 directly from Giga Shanghai. Almost overnight, a brand new Model 3 was priced like a Honda Civic. It wasn't just 38% less than the average new car. You could suddenly buy a globally leading software-defined EV with a full factory warranty for just 12% over the price of an average used car. But Tesla is the premium example. Chinese domestic EVs are even cheaper. For example, the BYD Seal costs in China roughly 24% less than a Model 3. Projecting that to our Canadian example, and a brand new Seal with long warranty literally undercuts the average used car by 15%. Slap 100% tax on it, and it still costs less than the average new car. And that's before asking how long consumers will tolerate paying twice the price for a vehicle just to subsidize legacy auto companies. But Chinese plug-in hybrids are even cheaper than this. So why do I focus strictly on EVs? That's because of a terrifying realization that just hit Jim Farley and the executives at Toyota. EVs are about to undergo a violent step change in price. Historically, the cost of gas cars and hybrids creeps upward, while the cost of EV tech is in freefall. But forget the old model of gradual change. We are about to hit a cliff. Today's EVs are still largely built like traditional gas cars. The next wave will be manufactured in a radically cheaper way, a method a gas car simply cannot replicate. To match Chinese prices and survive the coming decade, legacy automakers can't build an EV on a Ford Explorer or a RAV4 chassis and hope tariffs protect them. They have to completely reinvent how a vehicle comes together on the assembly line and reach a quantum leap in manufacturing efficiency. Tariffs can buy time and hybrids can generate cash, but neither solves the manufacturing problem. To survive China, legacy automakers have to make EVs cheaper than gas cars, not by discounting them, but by rebuilding the factory itself. And as we are about to see in the next chapter, both Ford and Toyota realized that their first attempts at EVs were built on a fundamentally flawed foundation, and they had to hit the brakes before it bankrupted them. Chapter 2. The Brutal Truth and the Quantum Leap. The first step in solving a massive problem is admitting you actually have one. Most legacy automakers are terrible at this. When Herbert Diess warned Volkswagen that it could not survive China without changing how it built cars, he was pushed out. Mary Barra spent years projecting confidence that GM would pass Tesla in EV sales, only to later write off billions in EV investments. That is what makes Ford and Toyota interesting. They are not pretending the old model is fine. They are looking at Chinese manufacturing data, looking at their own factories, and admitting that their current systems are fundamentally broken. Judging by current sales, their honesty seems a case of too little, too late. Ford has scaled down Mach-E and F-150 Lightning production. Toyota barely has an EV presence at all. Both companies are losing billions on their electric programs. If pure-play EV pioneers like Rivian and Lucid are bleeding cash, what chance do these laggards have? But to be fair, predicting the future is less about where the puck is now. It is entirely about where it's heading. So let's check Toyota's puck. A few days ago, Toyota abruptly canceled the mass production of its flagship next-generation EV, the Lexus LFZC. To the media, it looked like retreat, but in fact, this step back was designed to make way for a massive leap forward. To understand why that matters, look at what happened to Ford with the Mustang Mach-E. When Ford first launched the Mach-E, here is what then CEO Jim Hackett had to say about the financials of building the car.
Congratulations on the Mustang Mach-E. Will it turn a profit?
This will make a contribution margin on vehicle number one. So that's surprising a lot of people because electrics have not had a history of making money. But this will. Now, of course, the amortization of the development, once you get that behind, it's totally profitable. We have to cover the cost of the invention.
Hackett said the Mach-E would make money from the start, but he was talking about contribution margin, the revenue from each car minus the direct cost of building that car. What this ignores is the brutal fixed cost problem, the billions spent designing the vehicle and building the production system. If you spend $3 billion designing a car and building a production line, and you sell 500,000 vehicles, that fixed cost is just $6,000 per car. But if you only sell 50,000 vehicles, that fixed cost balloons to $60,000 per car. Volume is the only way to repay your capex. Early on, Ford's math looked okay. Priced similarly to the Model Y, Ford expected high sales. But then Tesla slashed prices, and Ford was trapped. To pay for the capex, they had to move metal. But to maintain any sales volume at all, they had to match Tesla's price cuts. This put Ford in a perfect death spiral. Stalled volume meant the massive fixed capex crushed their balance sheet, while cutting prices effectively killed their contribution margins. And when EV incentives made way to tariffs on the Mexican-built Mach-E, the pain got even worse, and Ford dialed back production. The new Lexus was supposed to launch Toyota's brand new, multi-billion-dollar next-generation manufacturing platform. But as a luxury sedan, it competed in an ultra-cramped, low-volume graveyard. Look at the data. An engineering masterpiece like the Lucid Air struggled to move even 16,000 units globally last year. Mercedes-Benz is facing a similar wall with the EQS and EQE. To move metal, these luxury sedans have been forced to cut prices down to the $70,000 range, barely above a mainstream crossover. As good as the car might be, it stood no chance of making serious sales and avoiding the capex death spiral. Determined to give their manufacturing breakthrough a fighting chance, Koji Sato redirected it toward a massive high-margin SUV where they could exploit high consumer demand for roughly the same manufacturing cost. Toyota's decision to cancel their flagship was the exact right move. The media quickly framed this as dialing back their EV plans, but Toyota is busy building a business, not PR. Stories about Tesla, Ford, Toyota, and the future of car manufacturing are often technical. They are about platforms, parts count, factory layouts, cycle times, and crucially, production cost. But most media coverage does not think like an engineer. It turns technical stories into narratives like legacy auto is catching up, Tesla's advantage is disappearing, America is fighting China, or buyers don't want EVs. That is why I use Ground News, the sponsor of this video. Ground News is a news comparison platform that gathers coverage from thousands of sources and shows how the same story is reported across the left, right, and center, including bias, factuality, and ownership. Take this story about Ford's secretive Long Beach EV lab, where it is developing a $30,000 electric pickup on its new universal EV platform. The real story is not just the truck, it is Ford trying to rethink manufacturing itself, which is exactly the kind of technical detail that often gets buried. But Ground News shows how quickly that engineering story turns into a narrative. Left-leaning coverage frames it as a bullish innovation story, Ford competing with China, reviving American manufacturing, and turning its EV business around. Right-leaning coverage focuses more on skeptical buyers and whether this is a desperate market bet. But the center-leaning coverage is where the technical details become clearer. The 2027 launch target, the skunkworks team, 40% fewer workstations, 25% fewer fasteners, and the former Tesla engineer leading the effort. Same story, but three very different lenses. And that is why I use Ground News even when researching these videos. It helps me separate the engineering signal from the media noise. Ground News is giving CTD viewers 40% off the Vantage plan that I use. Go to ground.news/ctdots and find a new way to get your news. Hitting pause is painful, but it prevents a much worse engineering mistake, optimizing a bad design. The reason Tesla could slash prices and remain profitable was iterative. By applying lessons learned on the factory floor, they went through several generations of designs, constantly engineering costs out of the architecture. In manufacturing, this is known as Wright's Law. For every cumulative doubling of production, the cost falls by a predictable percentage. You learn by doing, and you get cheaper by scaling. Wright's Law has a trapdoor. If you scale a compromised architecture, you just get really efficient at building a bad product. You can only optimize a design down to its foundational limits. At some point, making progress requires a full redesign. Tesla learned this exact lesson nearly 20 years ago with their first-generation EV, the Roadster, built on a modified Lotus Elise chassis. They quickly realized that adapting a legacy gas platform produces a suboptimal product. In the EV race, ground-up optimization is the only shot at survival. So, from Model S onward, Tesla abandoned conversions entirely and committed to dedicated EV skateboards. But in the rush to get electric cars to market, many first-generation programs ignored this lesson. The Mach-E and BZ4X became compromised hybrid architectures. For a century, Ford and Toyota perfected the internal combustion engine, becoming among the best in the world at it. But that expertise became a trap. You cannot build a competitive EV using the DNA of a gas car. Instead of rethinking the vehicle from the ground up, legacy automakers applied a century of internal combustion habits to electric vehicles. They swapped the gas tank for a heavy battery pack and the engine for electric motors, but they kept the old structural complexity. Listen to Jim Farley realize exactly how bad this legacy hangover was when Ford engineers finally tore down a Model Y and compared it to their Mach-E.
I was very humbled when we took apart the first Model 3 Tesla and started to take apart the Chinese vehicles. When we took them apart, it was shocking what we found. On the Mach-E, for example, which at the time was #2 best-selling EV in the country, our wiring loom, just the wiring in the vehicle, was 1.6 kilometers longer than the Tesla wiring loom. It was 70 pounds heavier, and just the battery, the cost of the battery to haul around the wiring in the car was $200 a battery.
For visual proof of this legacy hangover, let's watch Monroe Live's Engineering Teardown, comparing the thermal systems of the Mach-E and the Tesla Model Y.
Tesla focused heavily on getting everything as close together as possible. If you look at the back, because this is a heat pump system, the lines run in an exact straight line. When comparing and contrasting to the Ford Mustang Mach-E, you'll notice that the lines are not nearly as concise.
All right, well, first we're going to grab all the lines that the Mach-E has, which is, as you can see, a whole bunch of lines when compared to what the Tesla Model Y had.
Because Tesla designs dedicated EV architectures from a blank slate, their packaging is incredibly dense and efficient. The Mach-E, compromised by internal combustion thinking, relies on a sprawling rat's nest of hoses that looks like a plumbing nightmare. While looks aren't the problem, the added weight of these lines and the coolant required to fill them is. Here is the underlying physics problem. With an internal combustion car, some extra weight will hurt fuel economy, but it won't kill the car's viability. With an EV, dead weight triggers a cascading failure. Extra weight requires adding batteries to maintain range, but batteries are incredibly heavy, so you have to add even more batteries just to carry the weight of the batteries you just added. It is a death spiral of mass and cost. Ford wasn't the only one experiencing a rude awakening. Over in Japan, Toyota executives quietly tore down a Model Y. When the results came in, one Toyota executive famously admitted to the press that stripping the skin off the Model Y revealed a true work of art. They realized their own BZ4X platform was a dead end. The first EV generation was dead. Scaling it would only scale the losses. Realizing this, Ford and Toyota skipped the slow learning curve entirely, jumping straight to Tesla's three core manufacturing pillars: dedicated EV platforms, gigacasting, and the unboxed process. Traditionally, a car's structure is made out of hundreds of stamped steel pieces, held in massive precision fixtures and welded together by armies of robots. With Model Y, Tesla shattered this model, replacing those massive assemblies by casting the entire front and the entire rear of the chassis as individual single pieces. But castings aren't new in automobiles, so why hadn't anyone tried this before? For two reasons: the tech and the culture. First, it required monstrous machines capable of 6,000 to 9,000 tons of clamping force, injecting massive volumes of molten aluminum in milliseconds. The metallurgy was considered impossible. Traditional cast aluminum requires heat treatment to gain strength, but making a casting the size of half a car requires further heat treatment and risks cavities, fault lines, warping, and cracking. But the second roadblock was institutional. In legacy automotive cultures, radical risk-taking is heavily penalized. If an executive gambles $1 billion on an unproven manufacturing process and fails, their career is over. It is always safer to stick to the 100-year-old script. With the help of SpaceX metallurgists, Tesla tackled the technology. They developed a brand new aluminum alloy that achieved full structural integrity without requiring heat treatment. Instead of hundreds of parts being welded into one structure, the structure comes out of the mold already formed. Gigacasting was a massive leap forward. It slashed the factory's physical footprint, shortened production time, and wiped out the need for hundreds of welding robots. That meant no more maintaining them, and no more shutting down the entire line when a single robot malfunctioned. But more importantly, it radically changed the physics of assembly. In traditional manufacturing, automakers rely on massive, expensive, highly calibrated jigs to hold hundreds of flimsy, stamped parts in the exact right location so robots can weld them. But because a gigacasting comes out of the mold with unvarying, perfect dimensional accuracy every single time, it eliminates the need for external fixtures. The casting itself becomes the jig. And you don't have to take my word for how revolutionary this is. Just listen to the lead engineers of Ford's new California skunkworks team presenting their next-generation platform to investors.
Weight is another one of our greatest efficiency robbers. Our engineering team had a philosophy.
The best part is no part.
If the part is necessary, then it must serve multiple purposes. So first, we focused on reducing one of our biggest contributors to the vehicle weight, body structure.
To do this, Ford is using large aluminum unicastings for the first time.
These unicastings make the structure significantly lighter, delivering more than 27% advantage in casting weight over our competitors.
The best part is no part. That is a direct word-for-word quote from Elon Musk. But this isn't about plagiarism. It proves that Tesla's engineering philosophy has officially become the survival doctrine for the entire auto industry. And look at the mathematical result of adopting that philosophy.
To put a finer point on it, by comparison to the Maverick, has 146 structural parts in the front and the rear structure. The mid-size electric pickup truck will have two parts. Using unicastings enables 25% fewer fasteners than typical program. With reduction in parts comes reduction in joints, sealing, therefore robots in the factory, giving us immeasurable gains in product quality and the throughput.
146 parts reduced to 2. And over in Japan, Toyota is doing the exact same thing. They publicly unveiled their own Gigacasting prototypes for their next-generation EVs, demonstrating how they are replacing 86 sheet metal parts and 33-step processes with a single, massive die-cast module. That structural perfection is exactly what makes the next phase physically possible. Despite the massive advantages of Gigacasting, the factory still had a bottleneck, because at its core, the assembly process wasn't far from the days of Henry Ford. You were still starting by building a welded, hollow body shell, a structural box, and that box forces everyone to compromise. Humans and robots are left to contort themselves, wasting immense time and energy just to maneuver dashboards, seats, and miles of wiring through the narrow door frames. Worse, it is an absolute space hog. Moving a fully enclosed box down the line means every single station has to be sized for the entire car, wasting massive amounts of factory floor space. So, in 2023, Tesla engineered Gen 3, the unboxed process. This is the bleeding-edge manufacturing paradigm that Ford and Toyota are now desperately trying to clone, despite the fact that even Tesla hasn't fully proven it in mass production yet. The unboxed process violently shatters the linear assembly line. Instead of one long track, the vehicle is broken down into large, independent sub-assemblies that are built simultaneously in parallel. You take the Gigacast front and rear sections and work on them independently. Completely out in the open, unboxed, you bolt the seats and center console directly to the structural battery pack. Finally, you snap the massive front and rear castings to the battery pack and drop the roof on top. It drastically reduces cycle time, shrinks factory footprints by another 40%, and relies on shared, scalable platforms where a single Gigacast underbody can sustain multiple vehicle models. Internal combustion vehicles require complex drivetrains and exhaust routing threading through the center of the chassis, but an EV skateboard is completely flat. It is the perfect, uncompromised candidate for gigacasting and modular snap-together assembly. This is why EVs, when built correctly, are mathematically destined to be cheaper to manufacture than gas cars. Realizing that this paradigm shift will deal a final death blow to internal combustion, and seeing that several aggressive Chinese companies are already hard at work weaponizing these exact concepts, Ford and Toyota knew they were out of time. They could not afford to be left behind. Instead of repeating past mistakes, they took these advanced manufacturing concepts and forward-engineered them into their own distinct systems. Toyota is building unboxed assembly lines where the partially built cars literally drive themselves between stations, eliminating traditional conveyor belts entirely.
皆様、加藤でございます。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
Here's Takeru Kato, president of Toyota's BEV factory, their version of Ford's skunkworks. The car's modular structure, as an example, allows for a significant reduction in the number of parts through the adoption of gigacasting, contributing to reductions in vehicle development costs and factory investments. The new modular structure and self-driving production will have processes and factory investments. Meanwhile, Ford's skunkworks team is tackling that 1.6 kilometers of extra wiring Jim Farley complained about by adopting Tesla's zonal architecture.
With this platform, we're moving to a zonal architecture, where we're integrating multiple vehicle functions into a small number of modules. We're also moving from a 12-volt system to a 48-volt system, which allows us to reduce the copper thickness of the harness. In fact, these changes helped us make the mid-size electric truck's wire harness 4,000 feet shorter and 22 pounds lighter than one of our first-gen electric vehicles.
Let's connect the dots. Toyota is building gigacastings and ripping out conveyor belts for unboxed, self-driving assembly lines. Ford is slashing 146 parts down to 2 and tearing out 4,000 feet of wiring. Both of these legacy titans looked at the same existential threat and arrived at the exact same conclusion. Their engineering blueprints are now almost identical. But unlike the engineering, their corporate conviction could not be more different, because changing the machinery in a factory is the easy part. Changing the culture of a 100-year-old corporation is where the real war is fought. In 1519, Commander Hernan Cortés landed in Mexico and gave a ruthless order: sink the ships. Facing the massive Aztec Empire with no way home, he told his troops, "We win or we perish." And they won. Readying themselves for the upcoming tsunami, one of these legacy titans is preparing to sink their own escape fleet to force their team to save the Mothership. The other is quietly looting the Mothership, preparing to escape in an ark. Chapter 3. The Cultural Divide. But logically, why destroy your only escape route? Why not keep a lifeboat? In his classic book, Think and Grow Rich, which completely changed my life, by the way, link in the description, Napoleon Hill exposes a brutal law of human nature. If you leave yourself a safe retreat, you will inevitably use it the second things get perilous. To force yourself to fight through the pain and actually win, you have to eliminate the fallback plan. You have to sink the ships. In the war for the future of the auto industry, the ships meant for retreat are internal combustion engines. When Tesla started, they were born on the beach. They had no boats. With no fallback plan, they had to rapidly solve all problems encountered along the way just to stay alive. Legacy automakers faced the ultimate innovator's dilemma. They had incredibly profitable internal combustion and hybrid lifeboats. When the EV transition got difficult, companies like General Motors simply turned around, climbed into their gas-powered lifeboats, and sailed away from the electric beach. Ford and Toyota know they cannot sail away. They know the Chinese are coming for their ships too. If they want to survive, they have to adopt the newest, most promising technology. In this case, Tesla's unboxed manufacturing strategy. But adopting the unboxed process and gigacasting doesn't just require changing the machines inside a factory. It requires changing the DNA of the entire company. And this is where their paths completely diverge. As we discussed in the previous chapter, the absolute prerequisite to surviving a disruption is being brutally honest about your condition. You cannot change a corporate culture until the leadership admits the old way is dead. Jim Farley and Toyota's executives both sounded the alarm, but Toyota took it a step further. They recognized that the leadership who built the old era shouldn't be the ones leading the new one. In a massive shock to the Japanese corporate world, Akio Toyoda, the grandson of the company's founder and an absolute legend in the industry, voluntarily stepped down as CEO. He handed the reins to Koji Sato. This wasn't just a retirement. It was a highly calculated, symbolic execution of the past. It sent a shockwave through the company. The era of gradual progression is over, and the new era of software and EVs has begun. Now, as a quick update to the fast-moving timeline, while Koji Sato launched this initial transition, he has since stepped aside as CEO to assume a newly created role as Toyota's Chief Industry Officer. In this position, Sato is looking far beyond a single company. He is attempting to reform the entire Japanese automotive sector. The plan is to create a massive unified front, with Toyota potentially supplying its next-generation EV platforms and electrification tech at low cost to its legacy domestic partners. Toyota isn't just trying to save their own skin, they are trying to standardize their blueprint as a lifeline for the entire Japanese auto industry, thus saving the entire Japanese fleet and securing the massive production volumes desperately needed to amortize their development and tooling capex. But how do you actually change the way a 100-year-old engineering department thinks? Toyota decided they had to fix the mothership. For a century, Toyota's guiding philosophy was Kaizen, continuous incremental improvement. Kaizen is brilliant for perfecting a transmission over 30 years, but it is dangerously slow when you need to reinvent a vehicle architecture in 30 months. To survive, Toyota realized they needed to design hardware at the speed of software, so they brought in Joe Justice, the creator of Wikispeed and a world-renowned expert in agile hardware development. They literally hired an agile coach to run workshops inside the world's most conservative automaker, tearing down bureaucratic silos and teaching their teams to pivot, iterate, and redesign Gigacast components in real time. Toyota is trying to cure its cultural rot from the inside out. But to do that, they had to look at the collateral damage they were willing to accept. And just like they ruthlessly killed the Lexus sedan, they realized they had to ruthlessly kill their own sacred supply chain. For decades, the Toyota production system has relied heavily on the Keiretsu, a massive, interconnected network of suppliers who provide thousands of parts just in time for assembly. But this network isn't just about buying parts. It is a massive web of cross-shareholdings. Toyota owns huge percentages of its suppliers, and those suppliers own huge percentages of Toyota. Historically, this created ultimate stability. Today, it is a corporate suicide pact. Take Aisin and Denso, two of Toyota's most critical keiretsu partners. Aisin is a global giant in manufacturing multi-speed transmissions and combustion engine parts. If Toyota transitions to electric vehicles, which don't need multi-speed transmissions, Aisin's core business gets wiped out. Because Toyota owns Aisin stock, a rapid EV transition would crush the value of the shares sitting on Toyota's own balance sheet. This creates a perverse financial incentive. Toyota's investment portfolio actively pressures the company against modernizing, punishing the engineering department for doing exactly what it needs to do to survive. But it gets worse. Since Aisin also owns Toyota stock, they have voting power. They can literally use their shares to pressure Toyota's board to keep building gas cars and hybrids just to keep their legacy factories open. It is an incestuous financial loop that legally and financially protects the internal combustion engine. With surgical precision, Toyota started untangling their keiretsu web. Instead of recklessly dumping billions of dollars of Aisin and Denso stock onto the open market, which would crash prices and waste capital, they are executing closed, off-market deals at a discount. They aren't buying back shares to artificially pump their stock price like American legacy automakers do. They are doing it to permanently untangle their supply chain while preserving the mothership's cash. Breaking this financial suicide pact eliminates conflicts of interest, frees up trapped capital, and allows Toyota to become fiercely vertically integrated, bringing critical EV technology in-house just like Tesla. It will be incredibly painful, and legacy suppliers may go bankrupt, but Toyota's leadership realized it is the only way to save the mothership. Over in Detroit, Ford took a completely different path. Ford's executives looked at their own corporate bureaucracy and realized it was structurally unfixable. It wasn't just about stubborn engineers. It was about four massive anchors dragging the mothership to the bottom of the ocean. First, the union contracts. You cannot run a dynamic, rapidly iterating EV startup when you are bound by century-old union contracts. UAW job classifications are incredibly rigid. Agility isn't just difficult on a legacy factory floor, it is practically illegal. Second, the financial anchor. Ford is carrying the massive weight of legacy pension liabilities. While pure-play EV companies spend all of their capital hiring top-tier engineering talent, legacy auto has to bleed billions of dollars just to pay for past retirees. Third, the Wall Street trap. Unlike Tesla, Ford is a legacy value stock. Institutional investors hold it specifically for its reliable cash dividend, and management is under extreme pressure to keep that cash flowing today. If Jim Farley slashes the dividend to zero to fund a risky 10-year EV transition, Wall Street dumps the stock, the share price crashes, and institutional investors demand his resignation. Honestly, with VW and Deese in mind, I've been surprised that Farley has managed to stay at the helm for so long, despite pushing for change. In Chapter 4, we'll come back to how he managed to pull this off. The final, most fatal anchor is the dealership mafia. Due to archaic franchise laws, Ford cannot sell cars directly to consumers. They are forced to sell through independent dealers. But dealers make the vast majority of their profit not on selling the car, but on servicing it, oil changes, transmissions, and complex engine repairs. EVs practically eliminate that revenue stream. As a result, the dealer network views EVs as an existential threat, often stalling sales and slapping brand-destroying markups on the sticker price. Jim Farley himself admitted that this dealership model puts Ford at a massive $2,000 cost disadvantage on every single car. So while Ford and Toyota are chasing the exact same technologies, this is where their corporate actions diametrically split. Toyota looks at their legacy manufacturing system and sees a proud, seaworthy mothership, one with a good chance of surviving the Chinese tsunami. But to make it through the storm, they know they must modernize the hull, change course, and untangle themselves from their traditional fleet, because the interconnected network of suppliers that protected them for decades has become an anchor pulling them down. But Ford? Ford looks at their legacy structure and sees a vessel that simply isn't worth saving. Rather than fighting a losing battle to patch up a bloated legacy mothership, Jim Farley chose to execute a controlled demolition. He is systematically stripping his own functioning vessel for parts. Instead of repairing the legacy ship, he is building an ark. Jim Farley brought in Doug Field and Alan Clark, two former top engineering executives from Apple and Tesla, and set up a secret skunkworks division out in California, thousands of miles away from Ford's traditional headquarters. They were given a blank sheet of paper and a mandate to build a low-cost, next-gen EV platform. Field ran interference at the corporate level, while Clark led the engineering. And when you listen to this skunkworks team talk, they don't sound like legacy auto executives. They sound like a ruthless racing team fighting for survival. To build the vehicle differently, they completely abandoned legacy engineering habits. They hired ex-Formula One aerodynamicists. They treated the vehicle not as a collection of parts, but as a rigorous mathematical equation, incentivizing engineers with a system they called bounties.
Electric vehicles are basically a massive physics challenge. We know that many customers expect more than 300 miles of range. And the solution up until now has been to install bigger, more expensive batteries. This increases the weight, and that requires even more energy to move around. And traditional vehicle designs tend to be aerodynamically inefficient, putting even more tax on the battery. We knew we could do better by focusing on one thing above all: efficiency. And we did this by arming every engineer working on the project with what we call bounties. Bounties are numerical metrics we assign to key factors like vehicle mass and aerodynamic drag, factors that directly translate to efficiency and therefore the range and the cost of the battery. In a low-cost vehicle, it can feel counterintuitive to increase the cost of a part just to decrease its weight. But if we can give that weight reduction a value in terms of the battery cost, then we can decide if making the part lighter and more expensive actually saves us more money than adding additional battery.
This is similar to Tesla's battery dollars logic. As automotive journalist Jason Camisa recently shared, when Tesla was developing their vehicles, they evaluated design decisions not just by their direct cost, but by their effect on the total vehicle cost, especially the battery. One real example involved a more advanced roller bearing. It cost about 50 cents more per wheel, or roughly $2 more per car, because most legacy automakers work in rigid silos, and the standard bearings already met the basic requirements. The chassis team would immediately reject the new bearing as an unnecessary added expense. But Tesla calculated it differently. If that better bearing slightly improved rolling efficiency, the car would need fewer battery cells to achieve the same range. So a $2 increase in the chassis budget could reduce the battery cost by hundreds of dollars. That is true systems engineering. The question is not, does this part cost more? The question is, does this part make the whole vehicle cost less? This systems engineering approach completely rewrote the car's architecture. Ford's California team moved to a space-saving zonal electrical architecture, reducing 30 scattered electronic control units down to just 5 highly integrated modules. The skunkworks did exactly what Jim Farley asked. They successfully designed a software-defined, highly efficient platform. But if Ford has this incredible blueprint, why are they quietly locking it behind a firewall? Recently, Ford made a massive, highly suspicious organizational shift. They dissolved their standalone Model E EV division. Instead, they took the actual manufacturing of all future EVs and shoved it back into the legacy mothership, forming a new, company-wide product creation and industrialization organization led by COO Kumar Galhotra. Meanwhile, Alan Clark's California skunkworks team was kept completely isolated, strictly categorized as advanced development projects. At first glance, folding the EV division back into the company looks like a retreat, but look closer. This isn't a dependency, this is a firewall. Jim Farley is executing the exact same playbook as Apple and Foxconn. By separating the skunkworks, the brain, from the industrialization arm, the muscle, Farley is extracting the high-value intellectual property out of the legacy business. The mothership in Dearborn is essentially being downgraded to an internal contract manufacturer. If Kumar Galhotra's legacy factories can figure out how to build these unboxed EVs profitably, great, but what if they can't? If the mothership sinks under the weight of union pensions, dealer bloat, and Chinese competition, the skunkworks' $30,000 EV blueprint survives completely untouched. The Ark is completely untethered from the legacy hull. Toyota decided to sink their escape fleet, take the pain, and fight for the future of their mothership. Ford looked at the math, stole the gold off the legacy vessel, and built an Ark. And if you think that sounds like a wild conspiracy theory, reserve judgment until we follow the money. Chapter 4, Follow the Money, Transforming versus Looting, October 27, 2024. The Washington Commanders are trailing the Chicago Bears 12-15. The Commanders have the ball, but with 0 seconds left on the clock, their only chance is one desperate play from near midfield. with absolutely nothing to lose. Quarterback Jaden Daniels launches a massive arc toward a crowded end zone. A Chicago player tries swatting the ball away, but it is batted backward. Wide receiver Noah Brown catches it uncontested, and the Commanders win the game. In sports, it's called a Hail Mary. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and when playing it safe means losing, the only way to win is by taking massive risk. Judged by their press releases and engineering presentations, both Toyota and Ford are doing exactly that. Rather than retreating to their cash cows, like Ford's F-150 or Toyota's hybrids, both companies are betting the farm on the only technology promising a chance to keep costs low enough to survive the Chinese tsunami. They are throwing the ultimate corporate Hail Mary. But while both are talking the talk, are they also walking the walk? Let's check their balance sheets. Faced with an existential battle against Chinese competition, staggering development costs for unproven technology, and the need to build completely new production lines from scratch, you would expect both to be hoarding cash, paying down debt, and pouring every available cent into mastering and scaling this new technology. But are they? Checking their financial forensics, we see two companies operating in entirely different realities. To understand why, we have to look back at the toxic lesson Ford learned from the 2008 financial crisis. In the years preceding the 2008 crash, General Motors bled itself dry. They handed over an astounding $36 billion in dividends to their shareholders, and to keep that cash flowing, GM's financing arm chased massive high-risk yields by plunging deep into the subprime mortgage bubble. Had they kept that money in the company's coffers, they likely would have survived the crash. But they emptied the war chest, and when crisis arrived, they collapsed. Ford did the exact opposite. Under then CEO Alan Mulally, Ford literally mortgaged the rights to its own blue oval logo to stockpile cash ahead of time. That prudence allowed them to survive the crisis without a government bailout. Kudos to Ford for doing the right thing. But look at what happened next. Ford shareholders gave up huge dividends in the preceding years, while GM's shareholders got to keep every single dollar they drained out of the company. Ford itself remained saddled with the massive debt it took on to survive, while GM walked away completely debt-free, its liabilities wiped out and socialized by the taxpayers. Ford learned a devastating lesson. In the American automotive industry, prudent behavior is punished and reckless financial extraction is rewarded. And looking at the financial data today, it seems Ford is applying that exact lesson to the EV transition. Before we look at where the money is going, let's look at the overall health of these two companies. In finance, there is a famous metric called the Altman Z-Score. It weighs 5 financial ratios to assess a company's health, and it has successfully predicted over 70% of corporate bankruptcies 2 years in advance. A score above 3 is considered safe. Anything below 1.8 signals high bankruptcy risk, plunging a company into the distress zone. For context, Tesla's Z-score sits at an astronomical 18. Outstanding liquidity, no heavy long-term debt burden. They are virtually bulletproof. But what about the legacy titans? Toyota's Z-score sits at roughly 1.66. Despite their record-breaking profits, the massive leverage required to run a legacy auto empire drags them down into the gray area of the distress zone. This proves that CEO Koji Sato wasn't exaggerating when he said the company was battling for its survival. Toyota is highly capitalized, but structurally, they are standing on the edge of a cliff. They have to fight to survive. But look at Ford. Ford's Altman Z-score has plummeted to an abysmal 0.89, plunging them deep into the danger zone. Heavy debt loads, shrinking margins, and massive warranty costs have created a toxic mix that mathematically signals severe bankruptcy risk. Normally, when a company is hovering at 1.66, and certainly when they hit 0.89, management hits the panic button. They halt all payouts, hoard every penny of free cash flow, and desperately invest in saving the business. So let's see if that's what they are doing. Let's look at shareholder payouts. This metric tells you exactly how much of a company's actual net profit is leaving the building versus being reinvested into the EV transition. Toyota generates tens of billions of dollars annually, and because they know their 1.66 Z-score leaves them vulnerable, their payout ratio is notoriously conservative. They typically return only 35% to 45% of their profits to shareholders. Toyota is retaining the vast majority of its earnings to fund its massive R&D. new Gigacasting presses, and the unwinding of its keiretsu. They are keeping their war chest full. Ford, despite sitting at a terrifying 0.89 bankruptcy score, did the exact opposite. If you look at standard financial screeners today, Ford's dividend yield looks like a modest 3.5%, but that is a statistical illusion. Standard screeners only track the regular quarterly dividend. What they miss is Ford's habit of issuing massive, special dividends. Over the last few years, Ford has routinely dumped billions of dollars in excess cash directly into shareholders' pockets via these special Q1 payouts, including a massive 30-cent special dividend in early 2025. When you add those special payouts to the math, the reality is staggering. In 2025, Ford generated roughly $3.5 billion in adjusted free cash flow for the entire year, but paid out $3 billion in dividends. In plain English, Ford isn't hoarding cash or paying off debt. Instead, they are aggressively bleeding cash out of the mothership right when it needs capital the most. But why would Ford do this? This brings us back to the Wall Street trap from the last chapter and the reason why Jim Farley hasn't been fired yet. Ford is not a normal corporate democracy, it is a monarchy. The Ford family owns 100% of a special class of B shares. Even though these shares represent just 2% of the company's total equity, they command 40% of the voting rights. 2% of the equity gets to decide the corporate strategy, and as happens with many generational heirs, their lifestyle heavily depends on keeping the dividend fire hose open. In 2025 alone, between regular and special dividends, the family pocketed nearly $64 million. Jim Farley answers to the family, and the family wants to get paid today. And as long as the check's clear, Farley gets to keep his job. He is literally pausing the legacy EV transition, delaying the Super Duty EV plant to 2028 and pushing back critical battery plants indefinitely, just to make sure the cash keeps flowing. Even worse, while they were preparing to pay out billions to shareholders, Ford quietly took a $9.2 billion below-market loan from the Department of Energy. They are taking taxpayer money to fund their battery projects so they can use their own cash to pay the family. When you are facing an extinction-level event from Chinese automakers, and you need to invest tens of billions of dollars to redesign your entire manufacturing footprint, emptying the company's bank accounts is not a survival strategy, it is an extraction strategy. If you want to know how healthy an automaker's sales really are, look at their captive finance arm. When we compare how these two companies finance their vehicles, a massive divergence appears. Toyota Financial Services is incredibly conservative. Subprime loans typically make up less than 5% of their portfolio. They prioritize prime and superprime borrowers, aligning perfectly with their strategy of long-term corporate health over short-term cash grabs. But Ford Motor Credit is actively leaning into the danger zone. Historically, their subprime exposure sits roughly between 8% and 12%. But according to a Wall Street Journal expose, Ford has started actively courting riskier borrowers. Right at the exact moment that auto loan defaults are hitting historic highs across the country, Ford Credit deliberately lowered interest rates for subprime buyers, those with credit scores below 620, specifically to move inventory of their highly profitable F-150 pickups. Why would they do this? Because aggressively pushing subprime loans is a classic corporate tactic to artificially inflate near-term sales. By financing buyers with poor credit, Ford can move metal off the dealership lots and generate the immediate on-paper revenue needed to justify paying out those massive dividends to the Ford family today. But in doing so, they are injecting toxic debt directly into their balance sheet. This is the exact same subprime greed that destroyed GM in 2008, only this time, Ford is doing it with pickup trucks instead of houses. They are pushing the catastrophic risk of mass loan defaults a few years down the road. While the financial data and the corporate structure are public facts, predicting what Ford actually plans to do with this setup is highly speculative. But if you connect the dots between the money, the engineering, and the corporate reshuffling, a terrifying theory emerges. This looks exactly like a controlled demolition. And it finally explains the mystery of how Jim Farley has survived at the helm of Ford, while visionary CEOs like Herbert Diess were fired from VW for trying to do the exact same thing. Diess got fired because he tried to force Volkswagen to hoard cash and transform the entire massive legacy mothership. The stakeholders revolted. Farley took a different path. He gave the Ford family exactly what they wanted, maximum cash extraction today, because his grand plan for electrification doesn't actually require saving the legacy company. Ford is milking the legacy mothership for every last cent it is worth. They artificially inflated their truck sales using high-risk subprime debt and used that cash flow to extract maximum dividends until the math literally broke. They know that the subprime debt, the UAW, the pension liabilities, the bloated dealership networks, and their money-losing Gen 1 EVs will eventually crush the old company. If the Chinese tsunami hits, or if the auto loan bubble bursts, the legacy Ford Motor Company will sink, and when it does, they will leave the husk of the legacy business, along with its massive debts, to the taxpayers for a bailout. But because they built the Foxconn Firewall, the California ARC survives. By folding the old EV division back into the dying mothership, but keeping Alan Clark and the skunkworks team completely isolated, Ford is protecting the blueprint. That $30,000 unboxed EV platform will remain a clean, debt-free, non-union asset holding all the vital intellectual property. It will be perfectly positioned to be spun off as a brand new, highly valued tech startup. We can call it New Ford, just like New GM, smoothly sailing debt-free, after taxpayers are forced to absorb all the liabilities of the legacy company. Toyota is turning on a dime, sinking their escape fleet, and spending their cash to save the mothership. Ford is inflating the numbers, strip mining their functioning vessel, and preparing to leave the legacy hull to drown. Chapter 5. The Final Verdict. The Chinese manufacturing tsunami is not a future threat. It is here. It is already wiping legacy automakers off the map globally. Tariffs might buy Detroit a few extra years, but physics and mathematics always win in the end. A vehicle that is cheaper to build, cheaper to fuel, and vastly cheaper to maintain will eventually dominate the market. To their credit, the executives at Ford and Toyota looked reality in the face. They admitted their first-generation EVs were a failure. They admitted the 100-year-old assembly line is dead, and they both swallowed their pride and copied Tesla's blueprint for the future. But a blueprint is just a piece of paper. Executing on it requires more than just engineering capability. It exposes a company's true corporate morals. When you look at the corporate paths they have chosen, it reveals the ultimate tragic irony of the American auto industry. Leading up to the 2008 financial crisis, Ford did the right thing. They stockpiled cash, avoided toxic subprime lending, fought to survive without a government bailout, and ultimately kept their massive debt. General Motors did the opposite. They milked the company dry, gorged on toxic subprime debt, went bankrupt, and let the taxpayers wipe out their mistakes. Look at the landscape today. Toyota is acting exactly like pre-2008 Ford. They are taking the pain today. They are highly capitalized, avoiding risky loans, ripping up their own heritage, taking massive PR hits, and doing business the right way to prepare for the imminent tsunami. Ford is acting exactly like pre-2008 GM. They are strip mining their own legacy, inflating their sales with toxic subprime debt, and draining their war chest to pay the family. They watched GM get rewarded for reckless behavior, and they learned the awful lesson all too well. So, what do you think? Will tariffs force legacy auto to rebuild or just make them lazy? Can Toyota break its heritage supply chain fast enough to survive? And is Ford secretly planning a debt-free spinoff or genuinely fighting to save the mothership? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, please hit that like button and if possible, share it online. It really helps the channel grow. Without patrons, this channel wouldn't be possible. So please consider supporting me on patreon.com/connectingodots. You'll get ad-free access to all my videos and every bit of support helps. A massive thank you to my latest patrons, Media Cafe Online, Jeffrey T, Gonzalo LP, Siren MH, Mr. Leaf, Tom R, Michael S, JRW Development, Glenn W, Les K, Jim K, Phil, Jeremy C, Chris L, Ted Z, Atano Gary, Ewan MG, Glenn E, John L, Shubham S, Dan, Wendy GH, Rod C, The Gnostic Neuron, and Gasboy 2023. Thanks guys, and to all my patrons, you guys rock. Don't forget to visit ground.news/ctdots to stay informed and get 40% off the Vantage plan. For daily insights, follow me on X at ConnectingODots. Until next time, I am Connecting the Dots, and you are amazing.